The cases tonight all happen in daylight, in front of witnesses, in the kind of ordinary moments, a family hike, a school morning, an afternoon in the backyard, where nothing is supposed to go wrong precisely because everything is right there. And yet, we begin tonight in the ancient green hills of the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, one of the oldest landscapes in North America, where the mountains have been watching long enough to know how to keep a secret. It is the afternoon of June the 14th, 1969. A family has driven up to Spence Field for a hike. The sky is clear. The children are playing. One of those children is 6 years old. His name is Dennis Martin. He is wearing a red shirt. His mother dressed him in it that morning specifically because it is bright, so that if he wanders off in the trees, someone will see him. 6-year-olds wander. She knows this. The red shirt is her answer to it. The Martins are from Knoxville, Tennessee. Bill Martin is a young father, quiet, careful, the kind of man whose family describes him in interviews as steady. His wife is at home in the city. The hike to Spence Field is a tradition the Martin men have been keeping for years. Bill's father, Dennis's grandfather, Clyde Martin, is the one who started it. Every Father's Day weekend, the men of the family drive up into the Smokies and walk to the bald together. This year, the tradition includes the youngest generation. Doug, the older brother, is 9. Dennis is 6. It is his first time on the full hike. They drove up from Knoxville that morning. The road into the park climbs through some of the most ancient forest in North America. The Smokies are old, geologically among the oldest mountains on the continent. The peaks have been worn down by hundreds of millions of years. What is left is a landscape of soft, rounded ridges, deep coves, and a near-constant blue haze that gives the range its name. The Cherokee called it Shekinah, the place of the blue smoke. The trail to Spence Field begins at Cades Cove and climbs through hardwood forest, oak, hickory, maple, then up through stands of birch and beech, and finally, near the top, into the spruce fir zone that only exists at the highest elevations of the southern Appalachians. It is a strenuous hike, several miles, significant elevation gain. The reward at the top is the bald itself, a high open meadow at 6,000 feet, where the trees give way to grass and the sky opens up in every direction. No one is entirely sure why the balds exist. They are unusual. Most of the Smokies are dense forest, top to bottom, but scattered across the range are these grassy clearings, Spence Field, Andrews Bald, Gregory Bald, others, that have stayed open for centuries, possibly longer. There are theories: grazing by elk before they were extirpated from the region, fire, soil chemistry. None of the theories fully explain it. The balds are simply there, as they have been for as long as anyone has been walking these mountains. For a family with young children, the appeal is obvious. After hours of climbing through dense forest, you arrive at a wide grassy clearing with the entire sky overhead. The trees are at the edges, the grass is open, a child can run. By early afternoon on June the 14th, 1969, the Martins have reached Spence Field. They have unpacked their picnic near a section of the bald where another family, the Keys, happens to also be eating lunch. The Keys are not relatives, not friends, just another family from somewhere in Tennessee who happened to choose the same bald for the same day. The Keys boys are roughly the same age as Doug and Dennis. The children take to each other immediately, the way children do at 6 and 9 and 10. After lunch, the 4 boys come up with a plan. It is a small joke, a small plan, the kind of thing 4 boys put together when lunch is over and the afternoon is long. They will play hide and seek, but with a twist. They will not hide from each other, they will hide from the fathers. 3 of the boys, including Doug, will run into the trees on one side of the clearing. Dennis will run into the trees on the other side. When the fathers are not looking, they will all jump out together, a surprise. To make the surprise work, Dennis has to go alone. The other 3 boys will be together. Dennis will be the one coming from the opposite direction. Dennis runs off into the trees on his side of the clearing. The other three boys hide on the opposite side. The fathers, Bill Martin, Clyde Martin, the Keys father, and other adults in the picnic area, are sitting and talking, not yet aware that they are being set up. A few minutes pass. The three boys on one side of the clearing burst out from the trees, yelling, laughing. The fathers turn. The joke lands. But when the three boys come out, Dennis does not. Bill Martin notices first. He calls his son's name. There is no answer. He calls again. He walks to the tree line. He calls into the trees. There is no answer. For 3 minutes. 3 minutes is the time frame the family will later give to investigators. Bill assumes Dennis is still hiding. That is the game. The boy is supposed to be hidden. The other boys came out early. Dennis is still committed. Then those 3 minutes pass, and Bill begins to feel something change in the shape of the afternoon. He starts walking the tree line. The other adults join him. They are calling his name now, loudly, from several directions at once. Spence Field is not a place where a 6-year-old can wander far. The bald is wide and visible. The trees at the edges are not dense. They thin out into old growth as you move downhill. A child running into those trees should still be findable, within minutes, within the call of an adult voice. Bill walks the perimeter of the bald, calling. He walks into the tree line on the side Dennis disappeared into. He moves further. The other adults fan out. Some stay on the bald. Some go further into the trees. Some hike a short way down the slope. They call. They listen. They call again. Nothing. By late afternoon, Bill makes the decision. He leaves the Spence Field area and hikes down to the nearest backcountry shelter where he can get word out. He alerts other hikers. He sends a message down the mountain. By that evening, the National Park Service has been notified. By the next morning, the search is underway. By the third day, it is no longer a search. It is one of the largest search operations the Park Service has ever mounted. Over the following days, more than 1,400 people will work the Spence Field area. Park rangers from every section of the Smokies, state troopers from Tennessee and North Carolina, FBI agents flown in from regional offices, members of the United States Army Special Forces, Green Berets, sent from Fort Bragg to apply military search techniques to a civilian missing persons case. Helicopters crisscross the ridges. Tracking dogs work the trails. Volunteer civilians from the surrounding counties hear about the missing boy and drive up the mountain on their own time to help. The terrain they are searching is, depending on how you draw the perimeter, dozens of square miles of rugged southern Appalachian backcountry. Steep slopes, dense underbrush, streams cut into the mountain, cliffs in some sections, rhododendron tangles that can hide a body of any size for any length of time. But the search starts close. The immediate area around Spence Field. Then it expands. Then it expands again. Each day, the radius grows. The number of searchers grows. The cost grows. By the end of the first week, the search has become a news story across the country. In Knoxville, the News Sentinel runs daily coverage. The boy's photograph appears on the front page. A 6-year-old boy with a red shirt, missing in the Smokies. Then the weather turns. On the night of June the 15th, barely 24 hours after Dennis vanished, a powerful thunderstorm moves over the Smokies. Heavy rain, high winds, the kind of storm that, in those mountains, can drop several inches of water in an hour. The rain washes out scent trails. It floods small drainages. It moves loose ground. It does, to put it plainly, what weather in the Smokies has always done. It erases. When the dogs return to the trail the next morning, the work is harder. The conditions are worse. Whatever physical traces of Dennis had existed near the bald the day before, a footprint, a piece of broken brush, a single thread, are now compromised or gone. The search continues, for weeks, then months. The official search effort eventually stands down, But unofficial efforts continue. Rangers walk the area on their own time. Volunteers return. Bill Martin returns. He will keep returning for the rest of his life. They will find nothing. No clothing, no footprint that can be confirmed as his. No piece of fabric on a branch. No fragment of bone, recovered later, ever connected to the case. Nothing dropped in the underbrush. Nothing left behind. The trees that Dennis ran into give nothing back. This is the part of the case that, in the decades since, has produced the most conversation. The Smokies are wild, but they are not infinite. Children who wander away in national parks are usually found, dead or alive. The land yields. A child's clothing turns up. A small skeleton is recovered years later by a hiker off trail. Something comes back. For Dennis, nothing came back. Not in 1969. Not in the years that followed. Not in any of the decades since. The most thorough investigator of the case in later years was a retired NPS ranger named Dwight McCarter. McCarter had been part of the original search. He spent the rest of his career, and much of his retirement, returning to the file. He walked the ground. He re-interviewed witnesses. He re-examined every lead. He authored the most complete account of the case ever published, a book that compiles, in detail, every documented element of what happened on Spence Field and what followed. McCarter's conclusion, after a lifetime of work, is careful. He does not claim to have solved the case. He does not claim to know what happened to Dennis Martin. What he does is lay out, with the discipline of a career ranger, what is documented and what is not, and where the gaps remain. The biggest gap is one detail. Miles away from Spence Field that afternoon, another family was hiking. Their name was also Key, no relation to the Keys who were eating lunch with the Martins on the Bald. The second Key family was on a trail several miles distant, in a different section of the park, descending in elevation through the kind of country that lies below Spence Field on the southern side. Around the time Dennis vanished, within the same general window, the second Key family reported hearing what they described as a child's scream. Not a playful one, not a yell of excitement, a real one. They looked up the slope, and they reported seeing a man. They described him as rough-looking, unkempt, not dressed like a hiker, moving through the trees, carrying something over his shoulder. They could not say what he was carrying. They could not say whether the something was a child. They reported the sighting to authorities, but several days passed before the geographic distance between the two locations, the Keys at the picnic on Spence Field, the Keys hiking on the other trail, was reconciled in the investigation. The two reports were filed separately. The matching name created confusion. By the time the sighting was being treated with the seriousness it would later receive, whatever physical trail had existed below Spence Field was gone. The storm had moved through. The ground had shifted. The window had closed. The Key family's report became, in the years that followed, one of the most discussed pieces of information in the entire case. Some investigators believed it was unrelated, a coincidence of geography and timing, nothing more. Others believed it was the only thing that mattered. McCarter, in his book, is careful with the report. He neither rules it in nor rules it out. He documents it. He documents the delay in pursuing it. He documents the storm. He documents what the conditions would have meant for any physical evidence in the area below Spence Field. He documents the geography of how a man on foot, carrying something, could have moved from one location to another in the time available. And he documents, finally, that without further evidence, the report cannot be proven, and it cannot be dismissed. That is the case, in essence. A 6-year-old boy in a red shirt, a small clearing, a small joke. 3 minutes. A storm the next night. A second family, miles away, who saw a man carrying something, and then nothing. Bill Martin spent the rest of his life looking for his son. He returned to Spence Field every year on the anniversary. He kept a personal file of leads. He answered every call from a stranger who said they knew something. He pursued tips that went nowhere, He pursued tips that went somewhere and then ended. He talked to retired rangers. He talked to forensic anthropologists. He spoke at conferences about the case. He kept a photograph of Dennis at his desk. He died in 2014, without an answer. His wife, the woman who had dressed Dennis that morning in a red shirt so that he could be seen in the trees, outlived him by several years. She also died without an answer. Doug Martin, the older brother who had been hiding in the trees on the opposite side of the clearing when Dennis vanished, became, in the years that followed, the keeper of the family memory. He gave occasional interviews. He spoke about his brother. He has said, more than once, that the day did not feel unusual until it did. The morning was ordinary, the hike was ordinary, the lunch was ordinary, the game was ordinary, and then it was not. The Park Service file remains open. The case has never been closed. There is no statute of limitations on a missing person. Spence Field is still there. The grass still grows wide at the top of the mountain. The trees at the edge are still the same kind of trees. On a clear June afternoon, the bald looks exactly as it looked on the 14th, 1969. The only thing missing is a small boy, in a red shirt, that his mother dressed him in so he could be seen. What happened to Dennis Martin should have been impossible, and yet, 7 years later, on the other side of the country, a 14-year-old girl would walk 100 yards from her father and vanish in exactly the same way. She is 14 years old, and she has just unpacked her camera. It is a gift, a real one. Her father gave it to her for this trip, a 5-day horseback ride through the Yosemite High Country with him and a small group of other hikers. She has been carrying it all morning. She has been photographing the trail, the horses, the pines, the light. She is the only teenager on the trip, and she has spent the morning quietly making her own record of it. Her name is Stacy Arras. The date is July 17, 1981. The place is the Sunrise High Sierra Camp, a small remote lodging at 9,400 feet in the backcountry of Yosemite National Park. Stacy is from Saratoga, California, a town in the Santa Clara Valley, about an hour south of San Francisco. She is the middle child of 3. Her father, George Arras, is a dentist. Her mother, Mary, is a homemaker. She has an older brother and a younger brother. She is, by every account from people who knew her, a quiet kid. Soft-spoken, thoughtful, the kind of teenager who reads more than she talks. Friends from school will later describe her as kind. A teacher will describe her as careful. None of these are large words. They are the small, accurate words people use about a 14-year-old who has not yet had time to be anything bigger. Her older brother Mike will say, years later in interviews, that Stacy was the kind of kid who would spend an entire afternoon on a project quietly, without telling anyone what she was doing, and then bring it to the dinner table finished. The trip in July of 1981 is a father-daughter trip. George Arras has organized it, a 5-day horseback excursion through the High Sierra camps, a chain of 5 small camps connected by trail in the backcountry of Yosemite. The camps are spaced roughly a day's hike apart. Each one offers basic accommodation, tents on platforms, simple meals, shared communal cabins. There is no road access. Everything is brought in by pack mule. To reach them, you either hike for days or ride in on horseback. The camps have been operating in some form since the early 20th century. They are run by the park concessionaire. They draw a particular kind of visitor, older, experienced, comfortable in the mountains, willing to spend the money for guided access to country that would otherwise take a serious backpacker to reach. The trip is not strenuous in the way solo backpacking is strenuous. It is strenuous in the way that any week at altitude on horseback is strenuous. George brought Stacy because she had asked to come. Of his 3 children, she was the one who wanted to be there. She had been on shorter trips with him before. She had asked, specifically, for this longer one. She had also asked for a camera. He had given her one. The model and brand vary depending on which source you read. Most accounts simply call it a 35mm camera, the standard photographic equipment of a teenager in 1981. But the documented detail is consistent across every source. It was new. It was hers. It was the reason she had been quiet most of the morning. She had been taking pictures. The first 3 days of the trip pass without incident. The group rides from one camp to the next. They spend nights at Tuolumne Meadows, at Glen Aulin, at May Lake. Each day is the same shape: riding in the morning, arriving at a camp by mid-afternoon, settling in, eating dinner, sleeping at altitude. Stacy photographs the trail. On the afternoon of the fourth day, July 17th, the group arrives at the Sunrise High Sierra Camp. Sunrise is the smallest and most remote of the camps. It sits at the edge of a high open meadow, at the foot of the Sunrise Peaks, a series of granite domes that rise above the camp on the south side. To the north, the meadow drops away toward a series of small alpine lakes. The closest of these lakes, sometimes called the Sunrise Lakes, sits about 100 yards from the camp's cabins. The country here is, even by Yosemite standards, enormous. From the camp, you can see for miles in every direction: the Cathedral Range to the west, Mount Hoffman to the north, the deep canyons that fall away from the high country into the lower elevations of the park. The land is glacially carved: exposed granite, scattered pines, thin alpine soil. It is the kind of landscape that, in late afternoon light, makes a 14-year-old with a new camera want to walk down to the water. The group reaches Sunrise around mid-afternoon. The horses are unsaddled, the riders settle into their assigned tents. Dinner is still a few hours away. The light is good, the high Sierra light that sharpens in the late afternoon before it goes golden. Stacy walks over to her father. She asks if she can go down to the lake to take a picture. The lake is visible from the camp. She can see it. Her father can see it. The path is short and clear. It crosses an open meadow. There are no obstacles. The walk takes a few minutes. He says yes. She leaves the cabin wearing a yellow shirt and blue jeans. She is carrying the camera. Another guest at the camp, an older man in his 70s, a fellow hiker on the trip who has been pleasant company over the previous days, happens to be near the cabin when Stacy leaves. He says he could use some air. He offers to walk part of the way with her. They leave together. A short time later, the older man comes back alone. He had not gone all the way. He had walked part way down the path with Stacy, and then he had turned around. He was tired. He was older. The altitude was working on him. He says when he last saw her, she was continuing on toward the lake, calmly, camera in hand, not in any distress, just walking. He returns to the cabin. He does not, at that moment, think anything of it. There is no reason to. The lake is right there. The girl has a camera. The light is good. She will be back in 20 minutes. George Arras is not worried yet. The lake is right there. He can see the path from the cabin door. 20 minutes pass, then 30. The light is starting to change. The high Sierra light drops fast in the late afternoon. There is a moment, every day at altitude, when the warmth comes off the granite and the air sharpens. That moment is approaching. Her father walks out of the cabin and toward the lake. He calls her name. There is no answer. The camp is small. There are very few places a person can go. He walks down to the lake. He walks the edge of it. He calls her name again. There is no answer. He walks back to the camp and tells the staff. By nightfall, the rangers have been notified. By the next morning, a full search is underway. What follows is one of the largest backcountry search operations in the history of Yosemite National Park. The first search teams begin work at dawn on July 18th. Park rangers from Tuolumne and from the valley. Tracking dogs flown in by helicopter. Search and rescue volunteers from the Yosemite Search and Rescue Program, known in the park as YOSAR, one of the most experienced backcountry SAR teams in the world. The team has, by 1981, decades of experience pulling people out of these mountains. Within a day, the search expands. FBI agents arrive. Mounted units begin working the trails on horseback. Helicopters fly grid patterns over the Sunrise area. Bloodhounds work the cabin and the path Stacy had walked. The search radius, initially small, grows by the hour. Within 3 days, more than 100 personnel are involved. The search will eventually cover, by some estimates, more than 75 square miles of high-elevation backcountry, radiating outward from the path between the cabin and the lake. The country is rugged: granite cliffs, steep canyons, stands of timber, small drainages, talus slopes where a person could fall and not be found for years. The country is also, in many of these directions, very far from the path she had been walking on. To reach some of the terrain the searchers cover, Stacy would have had to walk for hours away from where she was last seen, through country that would have required her to want to be there. But the searchers walk the country anyway, because that is what is done when a 14-year-old vanishes 100 yards from a cabin and there is no other place to look. They find nothing. No clothing, no camera, no footprint, no piece of fabric. No trace of the yellow shirt anywhere in the landscape. The girl who had walked out of a cabin in late afternoon to take one photograph of a lake leaves behind, in the immediate search, nothing at all. This is the part of the case that, in the decades since, has produced the most discussion. Yosemite, by 1981, had a long record of lost hikers, and a longer record of finding them, dead or alive. The park's search and rescue teams were among the most experienced in the country. They had recovered remains from cliffs. They had pulled bodies out of the Merced. They had walked grids through forest for weeks at a time. The systems worked. They worked, in particular, for missing people last seen on a trail. Stacy had been last seen on a trail, a short one, a visible one, a 100-yard trail between a cabin and a lake. For her, none of the systems produced a single result. The older man who had walked partway with her was questioned, repeatedly. There was nothing inconsistent in his account. He was elderly, he was tired, he had turned around. He cooperated fully with investigators. His story did not change between tellings. He had walked partway down the path with Stacy. He had said goodbye. He had returned to the cabin. He had no reason to harm her, and no opportunity that the timeline would support. He was, by every measure the investigators applied, not a suspect, only the last person to have seen her. In the years that followed, the case stayed open. Park rangers continued to receive occasional tips. Hikers in the high country sometimes reported finding small items: a piece of fabric in a drainage, a buckle on a rock. On one occasion, a single rusted camera lens cap discovered in an area not consistent with her last known direction of travel. The family was contacted each time. They were asked, each time, if they could confirm whether the object belonged to her. They never could. The lens cap was the closest call. It was found years after her disappearance. The exact year varies in different accounts, in a section of the backcountry that did not match where she had been walking. To get from the path she had taken to where the lens cap was found, she would have had to travel through country in a direction that did not make sense for someone simply going to a lake. Park investigators examined the cap. The family was shown it. They could not say. It was a lens cap. It was old. It was rusted. It could have come from any camera in any year. The Arras family did not have an exemplar. They had no other photograph of the original camera detailed enough to confirm. The lens cap was logged as an item of uncertain provenance. It was placed in the file. It is still there. The camera itself, the gift from her father, was never recovered. Not the body of it, not the lens, not the strap, nothing. This is part of what has made the case unusual. Cameras are durable. The metal lasts. A 35mm camera dropped on a Sierra trail in 1981 would, in many places in the park, still be recognizable as a camera decades later. The fact that not even the camera has been recovered, not in the immediate search, not in the years of subsequent backcountry use, not by any hiker walking off trail in the broader Sunrise area, is one of the small impossibilities that lives at the center of the case. George Arras spent the next 30 years searching for his daughter. He hired private investigators. He returned to Yosemite year after year. He hiked the trails himself. He wrote letters to the National Park Service. He kept files. He talked to other parents of missing children. He pursued every lead the park gave him, and many leads the park did not. He spoke about the case in interviews in the years when he was willing to speak. He went quiet in the years when he was not. He died in 2013, still pursuing the case. Mary Arras, Stacy's mother, outlived him by a few years. She also died without an answer. Mike Arras, Stacy's older brother, became, like Doug Martin in the case of Dennis, the keeper of the family memory. He has spoken in interviews. He has described his sister. He has talked about the camera. He has said, in his own words, that the family never had the moment of resolution that allows grief to become something else. They had only the open file. Stacy is still classified as missing. She would be in her late 50s today. The Sunrise High Sierra camp is still there. It still operates, season by season, as part of the Yosemite Concessionaires program. The lake is still where it was, 100 yards from the cabin door. The trail between the two has not changed. On a clear July afternoon, the light on the water is exactly the light she walked out to photograph. Somewhere in those high Sierra mountains, what is left of a camera that was given as a gift on a 5-day father-daughter trip still lies on the ground. Or it does not. No one knows. The only certainty in the case is the walk. 100 yards. Late afternoon. A father watching from a cabin door. A daughter with a camera in her hand. And what the camera was for. 2 children, one 6, one 14, gone from places where someone was always watching, in moments when no one was. There is one more case tonight. A school trip, a maintained trail. A 16-year-old girl at the back of a group of classmates who had been with her all morning. The group is walking in a long line, 40 students, a few teachers, a maintained trail. The girl at the back of the line is 16 years old. Her name is Trenny Gibson. She is wearing a denim jacket over a green shirt, the jacket borrowed that morning from her older sister. She has been talking on and off with the friend walking ahead of her. The friend ahead has been turning around now and then to keep the conversation going. Each time she turns, the denim jacket is there, just behind her, where it has been all afternoon. Then the friend turns again, and it is not. The date is October the 8th, 1976. The place is the Andrews Bald Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, less than 30 miles from Spence Field. The same park, a different bald, a different child. Trenny is from Knoxville, Tennessee. She is a junior at Carter High School, a public school on the east side of the city. She is, by every account from people who knew her, ordinary in the specific way that 16-year-olds are ordinary. She has friends. She has a sister she is close to. She is a quiet kid more than a loud one. She is not in trouble at school. She is not in trouble at home. She is, on the morning of October the 8th, looking forward to a day off from classes. The trip is a Carter High School horticulture class field trip. The teacher has been planning it for weeks. The destination is Andrews Bald, one of the high open meadows in the Smokies, similar in character to Spence Field, sitting at roughly 5,800 feet of elevation. The Bald is reached by a maintained trail that begins at Klingman's Dome, the highest point in the park. From the parking area at Klingman's, the trail descends gradually for about 2 miles before reaching the Bald. It is not a difficult hike. It is the kind of hike that high school students take on a clear October day without much preparation. The class loads into a school bus that morning. 40 students. A few teachers. Trenny is among them. She is wearing the denim jacket she borrowed from her older sister. The sister had handed it to her at the house that morning when Trenny mentioned the field trip and the elevation and the cooler weather expected at the top of the mountain. The jacket is unremarkable. It is denim. It is what teenagers wore in 1976. The bus drives from Knoxville East into the park. The drive takes a few hours. The road climbs from valley elevation up into the higher reaches of the Smokies, ending at the Clingman's Dome parking area at 6,600 feet. From there, the class begins the hike on foot. The weather is mild, the sky is clear. The afternoon temperature at altitude is cool but comfortable, the kind of October weather that, in those mountains, can be perfect for exactly a few hours and then change. But on this afternoon, it does not change. The conditions hold. The class begins walking down the trail toward Andrews Bald. The group spreads out, the way a group of 40 teenagers naturally spreads out. Faster walkers up front with the teachers, slower walkers toward the back. Conversation moving between small clusters as people walk and talk and pause. Trenny is somewhere toward the back of the line, not lost, not separated, just at the back. The way a 16-year-old at the back of a school group is, present, accounted for, walking her own pace, talking with a friend who happens to be a little ahead of her. The friend will later tell investigators what the afternoon looked like from where she was walking. She and Trenny had been talking on and off. The friend was a few steps ahead. She kept turning back to continue the conversation. Each time she turned, Trenny was there, just behind her. The denim jacket was visible. The conversation continued. The group reaches Andrews Bald. The class spends some time on the bald. The teacher gives the relevant horticulture instruction. The bald is, in part, what the field trip is about. The grasses, the unusual ecology of these openings in the otherwise dense southern Appalachian forest. The reasons no one is entirely sure why the balds exist. After their time on the bald, the class begins the hike back up the trail toward Clingman's Dome. It is on the hike back that Trenny vanishes. The friend turns around to say something to her. Trenny is not behind her. The friend looks down the trail. There is no one. She looks back up the trail. There is no one. The teachers ahead are still walking. The group is still moving. The friend calls out her name. There is no answer. The trail is a maintained trail. It is not a wilderness bushwhack. It is not steep. It is not technical. It is the kind of trail you walk 40 teenagers down on a school field trip, precisely because nothing is supposed to go wrong on it. By the time the group realizes Trenny is gone, the count is somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes since she was last seen. That is the time frame the friend will later give. Maybe less, maybe a little more. She was there. And then on the next turn of the head, she was not. The teachers do what teachers do. They send students back along the trail. They walk back themselves. They call her name. They wait. They count heads. They count again. They go back further. Nothing. By the time the class returns to the Clingman's Dome parking area without her, the daylight has begun to fade. The teachers contact the park rangers. The rangers contact the National Park Service search apparatus. By the next morning, a full search is underway. What follows is the second large-scale missing child search operation in Great Smoky Mountains National Park within 7 years. The numbers are slightly smaller than the search for Dennis Martin, but not by much. Over 200 personnel work the area over the days that follow. Park rangers, state and county officers, tracking dogs, helicopters, volunteer search teams from the surrounding counties. The terrain is similar to the terrain that was searched for Dennis, southern Appalachian backcountry, rugged, dense, full of small drainages and rhododendron thickets, and old-growth forest where a body of any size can be hidden indefinitely. They search for over a week. They find nothing. No denim jacket, no green shirt, no footprint that can be confirmed as hers, no piece of cloth on a branch, No personal item dropped along the trail. Nothing left behind. The trail that Trenny had been walking on, in the middle of a line of 40 people, gives nothing back. This is the point at which the case begins to take on its particular shape. Because while the searchers were walking the ground, the investigators were doing what investigators do. They were interviewing the students. They were interviewing the teachers. They were interviewing anyone else who had been in the Clingmans Dome area that afternoon. And what they began to surface was a series of small accounts that, taken together, suggested a possibility no one wanted to consider. The first account came from one of the students on the trip. The student reported seeing a man, unfamiliar, not part of the school group, not in the parking area of any of the other hikers' vehicles she had noticed, who appeared to be watching the class. The student described him as standing near the trailhead, watching them get off the bus, watching them prepare to start the hike. A second account followed. Another hiker in the parking area that afternoon reported seeing a man in a brown vehicle. The vehicle had been parked in the lot. The man had been seen near it at some point. The vehicle had left the lot at some point during the hours the class was on the trail. The accounts were investigated. The descriptions of the man were partial. The descriptions of the vehicle were partial. Neither could be tied to a specific person or a specific license plate. The leads were pursued as far as they could be pursued. They could not be confirmed. So the case held in that uncertain shape for years. A 16-year-old vanishing from a maintained trail in clear weather in the middle of a school group, with a possible stranger in the parking area, and no evidence to connect any of it. Then, years later, came a different kind of lead. A man imprisoned for unrelated crimes in another state allegedly told another inmate that he had been in the Smokies in October of 1976, and that he was responsible for what happened to a teenage girl on a hiking trail. The allegation surfaced. It was investigated by Tennessee authorities and by the National Park Service. The man was interviewed. The details he produced, when investigators tried to verify what he claimed to know, did not consistently match the documented record of the case. Some details he gave were details that had been publicly reported. Some details he gave were inaccurate. Some details that an actual perpetrator would have known he did not know. The man was never charged in connection with Trenny's case. The allegation was logged. It was placed in the file. It became one of the most discussed, unconfirmed leads in the case's history, and it never produced a resolution. For the Gibson family, this was the shape the case took. A possibility surfaced. A name surfaced. The possibility could not be confirmed. The name could not be confirmed. The file remained open. The grief remained open. Trenny's parents searched for her for the rest of their lives. They returned to the park. They kept the file open. They wrote to investigators. They followed every lead. They followed the ones that came to nothing, and they followed the ones that came to nothing twice. Her father died without an answer. Her mother died without an answer. Trenny's sister, the sister who had loaned her the denim jacket on the morning of October the 8th, 1976, has spoken in interviews over the decades since. She has appeared on local Knoxville news coverage of the case on the major anniversaries. WUBER, the NBC affiliate in Knoxville, has covered the case repeatedly over the years. 5 years after, 10 years after, 20 years after, 40 years after. The sister has said, in those interviews, that the family never got the day they needed. The day where someone calls and tells them what happened. The day where the file becomes a file with an end. She has said, more than once, that she still expects, on some level, for the jacket to come back, even now, even knowing. The trail is still a maintained trail. Andrews Bald is still a maintained bald. The path between Clingmans Dome and the clearing is still the same path it was on a clear October afternoon. School groups still hike it. Somewhere on that trail, or off of it, or far from it, a denim jacket borrowed for one afternoon is still missing. A jacket the friend ahead of her had been looking at all day, that she turned around one more time to see, and did not. 3 children, 3 trails, 3 families who have spent the rest of their lives turning the same minute over in their hands, looking for the seam where the watching stopped. You are here at this hour because something about cases like these does not let go, not of the families, not of the searchers, not of you. There will be more nights like this one, and you will not have to come looking for them. For now, let the forest hold what it has held for decades, and let yourself rest.